On a quiet July morning in 2014 in Spring, Texas, a FedEx truck rolled up to a family's doorstep. But inside there was no delivery, there was only death. Ronald Lee Haskell, posing as a delivery driver, had one chilling goal: revenge. He entered the home of the Stay family, bound them, and executed 6 innocent lives, but one 15-year-old girl, Cassidy Stay, survived. She played dead, and in a desperate, life-saving move, she called 911, leading to a standoff that would capture a killer. What drove Haskell to slaughter an entire family, and how did one teenager become the key to ending this nightmare? Stay tuned to uncover the shocking details of a crime that rocked a community to its core. Spring, Texas, a peaceful suburban neighborhood nestled just north of Houston. It's the kind of place where families move to escape the chaos of city life, seeking tranquility in tree-lined streets and quiet cul-de-sacs. In this small, tight-knit community, everyone knows each other by name, and doors are often left unlocked as a sign of trust. Neighbors chat over fences, kids play outside well into the evening, and the hum of lawnmowers fills the air during weekends. There's a sense of calm here, a sense that in spring, life moves at a slower pace, and the darkest of secrets are far from anyone's mind. This is where the Stay family lived. Stephen and Katie Stay, a couple deeply in love, raising their 4 children with pride and joy. Stephen, 39, worked tirelessly to provide for his family, and Katie, 34, was the loving heart of the home. Their children, Brian, 13, Emily, 9, Rebecca, 7, and little Zachary, just 4, were the light of their lives. They were a close-knit family, one that often hosted gatherings with friends and relatives, a reflection of their open-heartedness and warmth. The Stay household was a place of laughter and love, where time seemed to stand still in the best possible way. The morning of July 9, 2014, was a typical summer day in Spring, Texas. The sun was bright, the air warm, and the sound of children's laughter filled the neighborhood. Brian and Emily were outside playing, Rebecca and Zachary were running around in the yard, and Stephen was working on the house. Inside, Katie was tidying up, keeping an eye on the kids. It was a scene of everyday normalcy, the kind of morning that any family would cherish, a peaceful moment that would soon come to an end in the most horrifying way. On the morning of July 9, 2014, the sun had barely risen over Spring, Texas. The small, suburban neighborhood was calm, with children playing in their yards and families going about their usual routines. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but just a few blocks away, a FedEx truck quietly rolled down the street, carrying a dark and twisted plan, one that would shatter this peaceful community forever. Inside that truck was Ronald Lee Haskell, a man with a history of mental instability and an obsession with his estranged wife, Melanie Lyon. Haskell, in his early 40s, had not seen his ex-wife in months. Their marriage had fallen apart years earlier, but his fixation on her and the events that led to their separation had never faded. Desperate and filled with rage, Haskell's mind had twisted into a dangerous place. He wasn't just seeking a reunion with Melanie, he was looking for revenge. Revenge against the family that had rejected him. Haskell knew that Melanie's sister, Katie Stay, and her family lived in Spring. He had no intention of delivering a package. In fact, he was using the uniform as a disguise, a way to get close to the Stay family, gain entry into their home, and confront Katie about what he felt was her betrayal. What Haskell didn't know was that the Stay family had no idea who he was. They had no reason to fear the man standing at their door. It was a little after 9 a.m. when Haskell pulled up in front of the Stay home. The house, nestled on a quiet street, was one of the many typical suburban homes, but it was about to become the setting for one of the most horrifying crimes the area would ever see. Inside, the Stay family was in the midst of their daily routine. Stephen Stay, the father, was getting ready for work. Katie, his wife, was taking care of the kids. Their 4 children, Brian, Emily, Rebecca, and Zachary, were getting ready for the day, unaware of the impending terror. The doorbell rang. Cassidy Stay, the 15-year-old daughter, opened the door to find a man standing in front of her, holding a FedEx package. He was dressed in the unmistakable uniform of the delivery service. At first, Cassidy thought nothing of it. FedEx was a common sight in the neighborhood. But something about this man seemed off. He didn't seem like the usual driver, and there was something cold in his demeanor. Haskell, however, wasn't there to deliver a package. He was there with a purpose far more sinister. He asked Cassidy if her mother was home. Confused and wary, Cassidy hesitated. She didn't recognize this man, and his presence made her uneasy. She told him her mother wasn't there, but Haskell wasn't interested in a simple conversation. He was already inside the door, his gun drawn. He pushed Cassidy aside and forced his way into the home, his movements quick and calculated. Cassidy was taken by surprise, unsure of how to react, but she instinctively knew that this was no ordinary delivery. At first, he claimed to be there to speak with his ex-wife, Melanie Lyon, who, unbeknownst to Cassidy, was not home. Cassidy politely told him that Melanie wasn't there, but Haskell wasn't interested in leaving. The tension in the air shifted, and the look in his eyes became cold and calculating. Haskell's intentions were far darker than Cassidy could have ever imagined. Suddenly, with a calmness that belied the terror brewing in the room, Haskell pulled out a handgun. He forced Cassidy inside, demanding that she lead him to the rest of the family. Confused and terrified, Cassidy complied. Her heart pounded in her chest as she led the stranger through the house to the family room where her parents and siblings were. At the time, Stephen and Katie Stay were in the midst of a normal evening, chatting with their children, preparing for bed. The day had been like any other, nothing out of the ordinary. But that would quickly change. Cassidy introduced Haskell to her parents, explaining the situation. Stephen, her father, immediately tried to defuse the situation, asking what was wrong. But Haskell wasn't there for conversation. He was there to get revenge. "I want Melanie," Haskell told them. "Where is she?" Katie tried to remain calm, but the tension was unbearable. Haskell grew more agitated, his rage building. He began yelling, demanding they reveal where his ex-wife was. But Melanie wasn't there, and the Stay family had no answers for him. In an instant, the situation took a deadly turn. Haskell ordered everyone to the ground and began tying their hands with zip ties. The family members, Stephen, Katie, and their 4 children, Brian, 13, Emily, 9, Rebecca, 7, and Zachary, 4, had no idea what he was planning. Cassidy's heart raced as she watched the terrifying scene unfold. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to act, but there was nothing she could do to stop the nightmare from unfolding. Haskell moved quickly, efficiently, as if this was a mission he had planned for weeks. With each step, the family members grew more fearful. They had no idea who this man was or what he was capable of. The first victim was Stephen. Haskell pulled the trigger, firing a shot straight to Stephen's head, and the room went deathly silent. Katie screamed, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but Haskell wasn't done. He turned to Katie and shot her in the head as well, her body crumpling to the floor, lifeless. One by one, Haskell killed the children. Brian, the eldest son, was next. He was shot at close range, his body collapsing onto the floor. Emily, Rebecca, and Zachary, only 9, 7, and 4 years old, were killed in the same brutal fashion. Each child, each innocent life, taken by a man who had no remorse, no hesitation. Throughout it all, Cassidy lay still, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that if she moved, if she even made a sound, she would be next. The blood from her slain family members stained her clothing as she fought to keep her breathing steady, to keep from revealing that she was still alive. Haskell didn't seem to notice her. He was too caught up in his own rage, too focused on the destruction he had wrought. When he finally finished, Haskell seemed satisfied. He believed that no one had survived, that his vengeance had been carried out. The family was dead, and Cassidy, lying motionless among them, was the last thing he needed to worry about. But Cassidy wasn't dead. Despite her wounds and the trauma of witnessing the murder of her parents and siblings, Cassidy managed to pick up her phone. Her hands shook as she dialed 911. With each breath, her chest ached, and the pain from her gunshot wound made it almost impossible to speak. But Cassidy's voice was steady as she relayed the nightmare she had just lived through. "I'm the only one alive," she whispered into the phone, her voice strained but clear. "Please, help me. I'm hurt. I can't move. I'm in the house. He's going to kill more people. His name is Ronald Haskell. He was wearing a FedEx uniform." Those few words, spoken through the fog of her pain and fear, would prove to be the lifeline that saved countless others. Cassidy's clarity and composure in the face of such violence were beyond extraordinary. The dispatcher immediately recognized the severity of the situation and dispatched officers to the Stay home. while also issuing an alert for Ronald Lee Haskell's vehicle, the black SUV he had driven away in. At the same time, authorities began piecing together the tragic details of the massacre. In a small community like Spring, Texas, nothing like this had ever occurred. The calm, family-friendly neighborhood was shaken to its core. But the investigation was just beginning. What could have motivated such a brutal, calculated act of violence? As soon as Cassidy's 911 call was traced, law enforcement went into full gear, mobilizing an extensive manhunt. Haskell, unaware that Cassidy had survived and managed to alert the authorities, continued his escape, convinced that he had gotten away with murder. He made a series of phone calls, including to his own family, as he tried to put distance between himself and the scene of the crime. Little did he know the net was closing in on him quickly. Witnesses had reported seeing a man matching Haskell's description, and the police had a lead on his location. The hunt was on. Tensions escalated when Haskell was spotted driving the black SUV near the area. Officers surrounded the vehicle, but Haskell, in a chilling move, refused to surrender. He barricaded himself inside the SUV, stalling for time. For hours, authorities attempted to negotiate with him, hoping to avoid further violence. But Haskell was silent, even as the hours ticked by. Meanwhile, the investigation into his actions started to unfold, revealing a twisted history of domestic turmoil. Ronald Lee Haskell had been involved in a bitter custody dispute with his estranged wife, Melanie Lyon, who had fled from him to protect their children from his abusive behavior. But Haskell's rage wasn't limited to her. He had fixated on her family, believing they were the reason she left him, and now his twisted need for revenge had claimed the lives of 6 innocent people. Haskell's background painted a disturbing picture. He had a long history of violence, including threats made against Melanie's family in the past. He had stalked the Stay family's home in the days leading up to the murders, watching their routines and planning his attack. He knew exactly when the house would be filled with his wife's relatives, and he knew how to gain entry. He had prepared himself for this moment, equipping himself with firearms and the disguise of a FedEx delivery driver, an innocuous figure who would be let into the house without suspicion. As Haskell continued to barricade himself in the SUV, law enforcement knew time was running out. But Cassidy's 911 call had been their saving grace. The information she provided about Haskell's appearance, his vehicle, and his potential next move gave them the upper hand. Finally, after hours of tense negotiation, Haskell surrendered to authorities, but not before making one final, chilling statement: "I'm done." When he was arrested and taken into custody, investigators quickly set to work to understand the full extent of the massacre and what had driven Haskell to carry out such brutality. His confession would reveal a chilling truth. The murders had been premeditated. He had meticulously planned the attack, knowing exactly what he was going to do. His plan had been to kill his estranged wife, but when she wasn't home, he executed the entire Stay family instead. His rage was all-consuming, and he wanted to make sure that those he blamed for his failed marriage paid the ultimate price. What authorities found next was even more chilling. Haskell had not only prepared for the murders, but he had also devised an escape plan. He was trying to evade capture, but his meticulous planning couldn't save him from the inevitable. The law had caught up with him. In the following weeks, as the investigation into the crimes continued, Haskell's past was scrutinized. It became clear that he had a long history of mental instability, coupled with violent tendencies. He had been involved in several altercations with his wife and had threatened her family before. His actions had been fueled by a sense of entitlement, believing that his estranged wife and her family had wronged him, and he was determined to make them pay. But despite his history, Haskell's calculated nature during the killings and the aftermath painted a portrait of a man who was fully aware of the consequences of his actions. He wasn't a mindless killer, but a man with a plan, driven by deep-rooted rage and a warped sense of justice. After Ronald Lee Haskell's arrest, the legal proceedings that followed cast a dark shadow over an already devastated family and an entire community. The case quickly became one of the most publicized trials in Texas, drawing national attention. The gruesome details of the crime would be dissected in the courtroom, and the search for justice would be just as gripping as the crime itself. The prosecution team wasted no time in building their case against Haskell. They presented a chilling narrative, a man who had meticulously planned the murder of his estranged wife's family. The facts were clear. Haskell was not simply acting on impulse. His actions, including posing as a FedEx driver and executing each member of the family one by one, pointed to cold, calculated premeditation. This was not a crime of passion or a random act of violence. It was the work of someone who had intentionally set out to destroy an innocent family. The prosecution argued that Haskell's motives were rooted in revenge. After his marriage to Melanie Lyon ended in divorce, Haskell became consumed by anger. His ex-wife had left him, and he believed that the Stay family had been part of the reason his relationship fell apart. He wanted to hurt Melanie in the most devastating way possible, by killing her sister's family. The fact that Melanie was not home at the time of the murders only seemed to enrage Haskell more. He would exact his revenge by taking everything from her. The courtroom was filled with emotion as the victims' loved ones sat in the front rows, struggling to comprehend the horror they had already lived through. The prosecution's case was devastating. Haskell had not only murdered 6 people in cold blood, but he had also placed the life of 15-year-old Cassidy Stay at risk. She was the only one to survive, and her courage would play a pivotal role in Haskell's conviction. Haskell's defense, however, painted a starkly different picture. His lawyers argued that he was not fully responsible for his actions, claiming that Haskell was suffering from a mental illness, specifically post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which he had developed after his time in the military. They insisted that his psychological state had caused him to lose control of his actions and that his intent was not clear-headed. They argued that Haskell's upbringing, his broken marriage, and his time in the military all contributed to his state of mind at the time of the murders. The defense brought in expert witnesses who testified that Haskell had suffered from a range of psychological issues, which included depression and severe anger issues. They claimed that Haskell had been experiencing a mental breakdown and that his actions were not entirely his fault, suggesting that he was incapable of understanding the consequences of his actions when he killed the Stay family. But the prosecution pushed back hard, asserting that Haskell's actions demonstrated a level of rational thinking that suggested otherwise. The way he planned the crime, the way he methodically executed each family member, and the way he laid out his plan, all of these details revealed that he was very much aware of what he was doing. He wasn't acting out of madness or confusion. He was motivated by something far darker, revenge, and a deep, consuming anger. Throughout the trial, the courtroom heard detailed accounts of the murders. Haskell's meticulous planning was exposed, how he had tracked the Stay family for hours before he knocked on their door in his FedEx uniform, how he waited for the family to trust him, and how, once inside, he swiftly restrained and executed each member of the family, including children as young as 4. The prosecutor argued that Haskell's actions showed his cold, deliberate intent to cause as much pain and suffering as possible. The way he stalked the family, his total lack of remorse, and the horrifying coldness of the murders painted a clear picture of a man who was fully in control of his actions, despite his claims of mental instability. But the most gripping moment in the trial came from Cassidy Stay herself. As the only survivor, her testimony was both harrowing and heroic. The teenager, who had lost her entire family in a matter of minutes, recounted the horror she had endured in vivid detail. With remarkable bravery, Cassidy described how she was forced to watch as Haskell executed her parents and siblings, and how, despite the bloodshed and chaos around her, she knew she had to survive. Cassidy's story was gut-wrenching. She told the court how she played dead to avoid detection, holding her breath as Haskell moved around her and her slain family. In one of the most powerful moments of the trial, Cassidy described how she had managed to escape from the house, running to a neighbor's door and begging for help. She recounted how she managed to make the 911 call that would eventually lead to Haskell's capture, giving police crucial information about the killer's plans and his movements. Her courage in that moment was extraordinary, and it left the entire courtroom in stunned silence. Cassidy's ability to survive despite the unimaginable trauma became the focal point of the prosecution's case. She had provided the key information that led to Haskell's eventual arrest, and her bravery had ensured that he would not be able to carry out his plans to kill even more people. As the trial progressed, the defense's claims of Haskell's mental instability seemed less convincing. His deliberate actions, his ability to think and act with intent, were too clear to ignore. Haskell had been in control of his actions throughout the entire crime. The jury deliberated carefully, weighing the defense's arguments against the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution. In the end, Ronald Lee Haskell was found guilty of capital murder. Despite his defense's efforts to argue that he was not fully responsible for his actions, the jury saw through his claims and convicted him for the brutal killings of Stephen, Katie, Brian, Emily, Rebecca, and Zachary. His sentencing was a sobering moment of finality. Haskell was given the death penalty, though he would continue to appeal the decision for years to come, delaying any sense of closure for the surviving family members. For the Stay family, and for Cassidy, the trial brought a bittersweet sense of justice. They had witnessed the man who destroyed their lives face the consequences of his actions. But no conviction, no sentence could undo the damage done or replace the loved ones lost in the horrific massacre. For Cassidy, the survivor, the process was especially painful. While the trial offered a measure of justice, it also forced her to relive the worst day of her life, time and again. In the years following, Cassidy's story became one of hope and survival. She shared her experience with the world, speaking about the importance of resilience, the strength that comes from within, and how she was determined to honor her family's memory. Cassidy found a way to heal not just through her own courage, but by using her voice to inspire others who had gone through similar tragedies. Cassidy's bravery in the face of horror was unmatched. She wasn't just a victim of a horrific crime, she was the embodiment of resilience. Despite everything she lost, Cassidy Stay found a way to survive, to carry her family's legacy, and to move forward, showing the world that even in the darkest moments, hope and courage can light the way. The massacre that devastated the Stay family left an indelible scar on the small community of Spring, Texas. What had once been a peaceful suburban neighborhood became the backdrop for one of the most horrifying crimes the area had ever seen. The violent deaths of 6 innocent people, Stephen, Katie, Brian, Emily, Rebecca, and Zachary Stay, were a blow that reverberated far beyond the confines of the family's home. For the residents of Spring, the horror of that night was something they would never forget. But even amid this unimaginable tragedy, something remarkable happened. The story of Cassidy Stay, the sole survivor, became a beacon of hope, not only for the people of Spring, but for the nation. As news of her bravery spread, people from across the country began to reach out to her. Cassidy's story transcended the violence she had endured. It became a testament to the strength of the human spirit, the capacity for survival, and the power of resilience. The world had witnessed the horror, but they also saw the aftermath. A young girl who, against all odds, had managed to survive and keep going. She was a symbol of what it meant to be truly resilient, to find a way to heal, and to rise above the darkest of circumstances. The community of Spring, Texas, was among the first to rally around Cassidy. In the wake of the killings, the town came together to offer their support, showing the teenager that, while her family was gone, she was not alone. Memorial services were organized for the Stay family, drawing hundreds of people from all corners of the town. Each person devastated by the loss attended to pay their respects, showing that the tragedy was not only felt by the Stay family's immediate loved ones, but by an entire community who had been touched by their kindness, their warmth, and their presence. In the midst of the sorrow, the town began to heal together. Cassidy's survival didn't just stir the hearts of the people in Spring. It sparked an outpouring of compassion from all over the country. Donations, both financial and emotional, flooded in from strangers who had heard her story. Fundraisers were held to provide financial support for Cassidy's future. The collective heartache of the nation was poured into these efforts, demonstrating how a tragedy could unite people in a way that nothing else could. Through the grief, there was a recognition that Cassidy's courage was not just an inspiration. It was a lifeline for those who believed in the strength of the human spirit. For Cassidy, the overwhelming support she received was a balm in the early days of her grief. She had lost everything: her parents, her siblings, the life she had known. But in the days and weeks following the tragedy, she found solace in the knowledge that people cared. The sheer magnitude of support showed her that while the pain of losing her family would never go away, there was hope for healing, and there was a path forward. Despite the darkness that enveloped her life, Cassidy began to rebuild. Her family's tragedy, while unimaginable, became a part of her story, but not the defining part. Cassidy's voice grew louder as she began to speak out publicly about her experience. She turned her personal tragedy into a platform to help others. She became an advocate for victims of violent crime, using her own suffering to help others find the strength to survive. Cassidy's story was one of hope, showing the world that no matter how devastating the circumstances, there is always a chance for redemption, recovery, and transformation. In the courtroom, the world watched as Ronald Haskell faced justice for his crimes. Cassidy's presence at the trial was a constant reminder of the pain Haskell had caused, not just to her family, but to an entire community. Her strength was evident as she addressed the court, speaking about the pain of losing her parents and siblings, but also about the power of forgiveness. "I forgive you," she told the man who had taken so much from her, "but I hope you get what you deserve." Those words, spoken in front of a courtroom filled with the weight of grief, were more than just a statement of forgiveness. They were a statement of power. Cassidy refused to be defined by her pain. She refused to let her family's killer rob her of her humanity. In those words, she took back control of her life. She chose not to let the horror of that night dictate who she would become. Instead, Cassidy chose to rise above, to show the world that even in the face of a brutal loss, there could still be strength, compassion, and hope. As Haskell was sentenced to death for his crimes, Cassidy's journey was just beginning. The conviction was a small measure of justice, but it didn't take away the loss she had suffered. The emotional scars would remain with her for the rest of her life. Yet, even as she faced the realities of living without her family, Cassidy found a way to honor their memory and live her life with purpose. She continued to speak out, using her platform to help others who had experienced similar trauma. Her story became a rallying cry for those affected by violent crimes, victims, survivors, and their families. Cassidy's message was clear: you can survive, you can heal, and you can find a way to live, even after the worst has happened. The legacy of the Stay family, carried by Cassidy's unshakable strength, became a powerful reminder to the world that no matter the darkness, there is always light. The impact of the tragedy in Spring, Texas, was felt far beyond the confines of the town. The ripple effects reached across the nation, sparking conversations about forgiveness, resilience, and the strength of survivors. Cassidy's story touched people's hearts, motivated them to support those in need, and inspired a movement of empathy and solidarity. The tragedy, though devastating, led to an outpouring of love and hope that transcended the horror that had taken place in one small house. In the end, Cassidy's story is one of survival, but it is also one of rebirth. She was forced to confront the unthinkable, but through that she found her purpose. Her voice, strong and unwavering, became a source of inspiration for countless people, a reminder that even when everything seems lost, we have the power to rebuild, to forgive, and to move forward. The tragedy that unfolded in Spring, Texas on July 9, 2014, was one of unimaginable horror. Ronald Lee Haskell's brutal actions left 6 people dead, a community shattered, and a family destroyed. But amid the darkness, there was one shining light: 15-year-old Cassidy Stay. Her courage, in the face of overwhelming terror, saved lives and brought justice to a brutal crime. In the years since, Cassidy has emerged as a symbol of strength, resilience, and the power of the human spirit. While the loss of her family is something no one should ever endure, Cassidy's story proves that even in the most painful moments, it's possible to rise, rebuild, and inspire others. Today, Cassidy continues to share her story, helping others find hope in their darkest hours. She is a testament to the fact that while tragedy can strike at any time, it is the way we respond that defines us. Her bravery, her forgiveness, and her unwavering strength have left an indelible mark on the world. What are your thoughts on this tragic case? Can you imagine the pain Cassidy endured and the strength it took for her to survive? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going and support the survivors who inspire us all. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping true crime stories. Thank you for watching.